The HOA lawyer thought he could destroy my family over a garage full of my late father's tools, until I bought his office building and handed him an eviction notice. Picture me standing in my perfectly organized garage, holding the legal papers that would make this fancy attorney homeless. The same garage that, just 6 months earlier, had been packed floor to ceiling with my dad's woodworking equipment. Every saw, every chisel, every hand plane he'd collected over 40 years of craftsmanship. My footsteps echoed through that lawyer's empty office suite as I personally delivered his 30-day notice. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of Dad's old chisels. These people thought they could bully a grieving son into abandoning his father's legacy. They had no idea who they were messing with. My name is Jake Morrison. 6 months ago, my world turned upside down when my father dropped dead of a massive heart attack right there in his workshop. Dad was 68, built like a brick house, and could outwork guys half his age. One minute, he was hand sanding a jewelry box for my mom's birthday. The next minute, he was gone. I was 45, an electrician and contractor for over 20 years, but nothing prepared me for walking into that garage after the funeral. It smelled like sawdust and dreams. $50,000 worth of professional woodworking tools collected over 4 decades. Table saws, band saws, hand planes that cost more than my truck payment. Chisels sharp enough to split a hair. Dad's workshop wasn't just storage. It was a cathedral to craftsmanship. I inherited the house in Pinewood Estates, an upper-middle-class subdivision built back in 1995 with strict HOA covenants and residents who treated a single dandelion in your lawn like a crime against humanity. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, and enough petty rules to choke a horse. I moved back into my childhood bedroom to settle Dad's estate, working electrical contracts remotely while figuring out what to do with his life's work. That's when I met Margaret Thornfield. She was 62, the kind of woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a country club catalog. Pearl necklace, perfectly styled silver hair, and a white Lexus that probably cost more than most people make in a year. Maggie, as she insisted I call her, was the HOA president and a former real estate agent. She had that fake smile that never reached her eyes and manicured nails she loved tapping on her clipboard. Just 3 days after I moved in, there she was at my front door, clipboard in hand, pearl necklace catching the morning sunlight like a warning beacon. "Mr. Morrison," she said, not waiting for an invitation as she tried to peek around me toward the garage. "I'm here about a covenant violation. No storage of commercial equipment in residential garages." I explained that these weren't commercial tools. They were my father's personal collection, inherited property that meant everything to my family. "Rules are rules," she replied, her manicured nails drumming against the clipboard like a woodpecker with an attitude problem. "You have 30 days to comply or face fines." But what really caught my attention was the way her eyes lingered on Dad's vintage table saw, calculating its value like she was appraising inventory. This wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics. This was about opportunity. I spent the next week researching those HOA covenants and discovered the clause was more ambiguous than a politician's campaign promise. It mentioned commercial operations, not equipment storage. I visited 3 neighbors, and they all admitted the same thing. Maggie had a history of selective enforcement that would make a corrupt cop blush. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh, the elderly widow next door, pulled me aside one afternoon while watering her roses. "She forced the Johnson family out last year over a fence that was 6 inches too tall," she whispered. Funny thing is, Maggie's realtor friend bought their house the next week. That's when it hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. This wasn't about rules or community standards. This was about power and profit. Maggie Thornfield had turned our neighborhood HOA into her personal ATM machine, and my father's garage full of valuable tools looked like her next withdrawal. The garage door still creaked the same way it had when I was 12. Dad never fixed that hinge, but now that familiar sound felt different. It wasn't just a reminder of childhood. It was a battle cry. These people thought they could steamroll a grieving son into abandoning his father's legacy. They had no idea who they were dealing with. On day 28, a certified letter arrived like a grenade with a bow on it. $500 in fines plus $100 a day for the continuing violation. By day 35, the fines had ballooned to $1,200, and they were threatening to slap a lien on Dad's house. Then the doorbell started buzzing at 7 in the morning like an angry wasp. A process server. Nothing says good morning like getting sued before your first cup of coffee. But here's what 20 years as an electrician teaches you. You learn to read blueprints. And HOA covenants are just legal blueprints written by lawyers who charge by the comma. I spent 3 days photographing everything: garage organization, tool serial numbers, inheritance documentation, with timestamps that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Then I hit the county courthouse and dug into the HOA incorporation documents. Buried in Section 14, subsection C, was a beautiful little exemption for inherited personal property stored in an orderly fashion. I spent the next weekend turning Dad's garage into something that would make a Snap-on tool catalog jealous. Every tool mounted on pegboards with military precision. Hand planes arranged by size like a symphonic crescendo. I even epoxy painted the floor, so shiny you could use it as a mirror. I took professional photos and sent Maggie a certified response citing the exact covenant exemption. 3 days later, Maggie was back at my door with backup. Her secretary Janet looked like a nervous chihuahua, and behind them stood a man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Italian leather shoes, cologne thick enough to choke a rhinoceros, and the kind of confidence that only comes from billing $300 an hour. "Mr. Morrison," he said, extending a hand that had never touched a callus in its life. "Rick Caldwell, attorney representing the Pinewood Estates, HOA. Caldwell looked at my garage setup and chuckled like I'd shown him a crayon drawing. "Your interpretation of the covenants is creative, but incorrect. We're prepared to file suit for covenant violation and legal fees." While he was busy being condescending, he was also taking photos of my house exterior and making notes. I heard Maggie whisper to Janet, "The market's hot. This lot could go for $850 easy." Suddenly, everything clicked. They didn't want compliance. They wanted me gone. This was real estate speculation with a legal twist. After they left, I stood in that garage listening to the familiar creak of the door Dad never fixed. Something crystallized in my mind. These people thought a working-class electrician would roll over when threatened with legal action. They thought wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep because an idea was forming, crazy and audacious enough that Dad would have either laughed his ass off or called me certifiably insane. Maybe both. 2 weeks later, the real lawsuit hit like a freight train. $25,000 in claimed damages plus attorney fees. Apparently, my dad's tools were somehow causing irreparable harm to the neighborhood's property values. The local newspaper ran a story that painted me as a hoarder disturbing the peace. Within hours, contractors I worked with started receiving anonymous complaints about my licensing. I hired Sarah Mitchell, a sharp young attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed the lawsuit and laughed out loud. "Jake, this is as frivolous as a $3 bill. They're fishing for settlement money." She filed a countersuit for harassment and moved to dismiss their case. During discovery, we uncovered some interesting things. The HOA had paid $15,000 in legal bills to Caldwell's firm in the past year alone. Maggie's husband owned a property management company that specialized in handling foreclosed HOA properties. 8 homeowners have been forced out over the past 3 years, with their properties resold above market value through a network of friendly realtors. The settlement offer arrived. Drop the countersuit, pay $5,000, and move the tools. I declined. We kept digging and found a critical error in the original HOA filing documents that severely limited their covenant enforcement powers. While Caldwell pushed for an injunction to force immediate tool removal, Sarah did some detective work. She discovered that Caldwell's law firm didn't own their fancy office building in the Meridian. They rented it. The owner was an elderly gentleman named Frank Garrison who wanted to retire and move to Florida. I approached him privately and bought the building for $2 million, using proceeds from selling most of Dad's tool collection and a commercial loan secured against the house and my business. The court denied Caldwell's injunction. Then the building purchase closed. Caldwell's firm had 6 months left on their lease, but it rolled month to month afterward, and they were paying well below market rent, $8,500 a month when comparable space went for $12,000. Even better, the lease included a personal services clause tying discounted rent to legal work for the HOA. Down in the basement storage that came with the building, I found old boxes containing original 1995 marketing materials for Pinewood Estates. They promised flexible covenant enforcement and homeowner-friendly policies, documents signed by Maggie herself as the selling agent. Those materials directly contradicted the harsh enforcement tactics the HOA was now using. There were also financial records showing sweetheart deals between Caldwell and the previous owner, Maggie's ex-husband from a messy divorce. I instructed building management to send Caldwell a formal compliance notice for unpermitted modifications in his suite, walls moved, electrical work without permits, fire code violations. He had 30 days to fix everything or face lease termination, the same pressure tactic they had used on me. Meanwhile, security cameras I'd installed captured Maggie driving by my house daily, and eventually footage of her slashing my truck tires and attempting to break into my garage at 2 in the morning. Criminal charges were filed against her for stalking, harassment, and criminal mischief. A class action lawsuit was launched using the old marketing materials, with 12 former homeowners joining as plaintiffs. The potential damages climbed toward $2 million. The local news picked up the story. Maggie's desperation grew. She filed false complaints against me, but the evidence was overwhelming. At an emergency homeowner meeting, residents voted no confidence in the current board and removed Maggie and Janet. New elections brought in Mrs. Dorothy Walsh as president. Caldwell's firm withdrew from representing the HOA, and he scrambled to find new office space as his lease violations mounted. Maggie was arrested for attempted burglary after security footage showed her fumbling with my garage door lock and hiding in a neighbor's bushes. The HOA audit revealed over $300,000 in questionable expenses funneled to Maggie's husband's company. The class action suit settled for $8 million paid to affected homeowners. My personal case was dismissed with prejudice, and the HOA admitted no violations had ever occurred on my property. Caldwell faced state bar sanctions that ended his legal career. Maggie pleaded guilty to multiple charges and received probation, restitution, and community service. Her husband's business dissolved, and their licenses were revoked. Today, the new HOA board operates with transparency and common sense. My garage, once the center of conflict, has become a community gathering space where neighbors share stories and kids learn woodworking using Dad's restored tools. The office building now houses a free HOA dispute mediation center and a woodworking studio honoring my father's memory. The garage door no longer creaks. I finally fixed that hinge. Every morning, the scent of fresh coffee mixes with wood shavings and the quiet satisfaction of work well done, both in carpentry and in justice. This fight was never really just about tools or a garage. It was about standing up to bullies who hide behind authority, protecting a community from predators who feed on fear, and honoring the memory of a man who taught me that good tools deserve respect, and good people deserve better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent. It's quiet, strategic, and served ice cold with legal papers and a side of poetic justice that makes bullies think twice before targeting their next victim.